The alien queen feared betrayal until she found her daughters with a human. The alien queen stood at the edge of the balcony, her piercing eyes scanning the vast landscape below. The stars shimmered like 1,000 forgotten secrets in the night sky. Her empire stretched across countless planets, and with it her power. No one dared to challenge her authority, but deep inside her, a fear lingered one she couldn't shake, the fear of betrayal. For years, she had ruled with a firm hand, her decisions unchallenged. Her empire was a machine operating smoothly under her strict control. But even a machine has its weaknesses, and the queen knew it. She trusted few, and even fewer earned her loyalty. Her closest allies were loyal, yes, but they were only loyal as long as it suited them. She understood this. She had learned that people could be loyal until they weren't, until a whisper in the dark or a promise of more power turned them against her. Her 2 daughters were her greatest concern. Beautiful, strong, and intelligent, they were being groomed to follow in her footsteps and rule when the time came. They were her legacy, and the queen knew their potential. But she also knew their growing curiosity about the world beyond their palace, about the humans who lived on a distant, less civilized planet. She had kept them isolated for a reason. Humans were nothing more than a lesser species, a barbaric race with no place in her empire. The queen's advisors whispered warnings to her, and yet she could not silence the small voice inside her that feared her daughters might look outside for answers. She had not raised them to think for themselves, but she had noticed subtle changes in their behavior. Little things. A passing interest in the humans' ways, a flicker of curiosity when their conversations turned to matters outside the empire's borders. The queen had dismissed it at first, but now it seemed as if their defiance grew with each passing day. She could not allow it. She would not allow it. "You must stay close," she had told them many times. "You are the future of our people. Do not waste your time on distractions." Her voice was always cold, firm. She had always been this way, distant, calculating. The queen's thoughts returned to her daughters. The older of the 2, Elena, was the more adventurous. She had the spirit of her mother, fierce and unyielding. She followed the rules, but only just enough to keep her mother satisfied. The younger Lyra was more reserved, thoughtful. She seemed to be the quieter of the 2, but the queen suspected her thoughts ran deep, even deeper than Elena's. It was Lyra who concerned her the most. The queen paced back and forth in her chamber, her heels clicking against the cold stone floor. She couldn't stop thinking about the moment when her daughters would no longer be her obedient children, but the leaders they were destined to become. Would they remain loyal? Would they understand the sacrifices she had made to build the empire they would one day rule? Or would they betray her like so many others before them? Her heart tightened at the thought. She dismissed the thought as quickly as it had come. She would not let fear control her. The empire was too important. Her daughters would understand. They had to. But even as she thought this, a nagging voice in her mind whispered, "What if they don't?" The queen took a deep breath and turned away from the balcony, her gaze shifting to the sleek, holographic map of her empire displayed across the room. She ran her fingers through the shimmering projection, tracing the outlines of her vast domain. She had created all of this. Every planet, every colony, and now it was at risk. Not from external enemies, no, her empire was secure in that regard. It was from within. Her own blood could betray her. A sudden sound at the door made her jump. She turned sharply to see her chief advisor, a tall, imposing figure, entering the room with a cautious step. "Your Majesty," the advisor began, bowing low. "There are reports of unusual activity near the human frontier. Some of the younger officers are requesting more intelligence on the human settlements." The queen's heart skipped a beat. The humans, she had hoped to ignore them to keep them out of her thoughts. But they were a constant reminder of the one thing she couldn't control, the unknown. "Human settlements?" she repeated, her voice sharp. "What are they planning?" "We do not know yet, Your Majesty," the advisor replied, his tone measured. "But it is worth investigating. The humans are unpredictable. We should not let our guard down." The queen considered this. The humans had always been beneath her, but if they were planning something, if there was even the smallest chance they could be a threat, she could not ignore it. Her fear of betrayal surged once more. The thought of her daughters interacting with these creatures made her blood run cold. She had to act. She couldn't allow her daughters to be led astray by the humans. They were far too important. Too many had died for this empire to be weakened by a few misguided hearts. She would tighten control, double the security, and keep a closer eye on her daughters. They would remain loyal, no matter what it took. "I want a full investigation on the human frontier," the queen ordered, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Make sure no one leaves the palace. No one speaks to the humans. If they do, they will answer to me." The advisor nodded, but his eyes betrayed a hint of hesitation. "As you wish, your majesty." The queen turned her back to him, her eyes returning to the stars beyond the window. She had always prided herself on her control, her ability to see everything before it happened. But now she feared she had missed something she couldn't see. Her daughters, could they truly betray her? Could they choose the human over the empire? The thought gnawed at her, refusing to leave her mind. She had always been right, always been in control. But now she wasn't so sure. The queen stood there alone, staring into the night. The fear of betrayal burned inside her. She had built this empire from the ground up, but would her daughters be the ones to tear it all down? Only time would tell. Lena stepped quietly into the dimly lit chamber, her heart racing with excitement and fear. She had always been the bold one, the one who loved to explore beyond the walls of the palace. But tonight, everything felt different. Tonight, she was stepping into a world she had been told to avoid, a world that her mother, the queen, had warned her about. The humans. The chamber was filled with the soft hum of machinery, the air thick with the scent of strange metals and oils. Elena glanced around nervously, making sure no one had followed her. She had told her sister, Lyra, about her plans, but she hadn't expected to be this nervous. She had imagined it differently, an adventure, a thrill. But now, with the dark corners of the room seeming to swallow her every step, the reality of it was more intimidating than she had expected. She had never met a human before, but their stories had always intrigued her. They were so different from her own people, so raw, so unpredictable. Elena couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to experience their world, to break free from the suffocating walls of the palace. She walked further into the room, her boots making soft echoes on the metal floor. In the far corner, she could make out the shadowy figure of a man. He was tall, with unkempt hair and a rugged appearance, his clothes simple yet well-worn. He turned as she approached, his face softening into a smile. "You're early," he said, his voice low and warm. Elena froze, startled by the sound of his voice. Her pulse quickened. This was the human she had heard so much about. He was real, standing right in front of her. The stories she had heard of humans being rough and uncivilized were hard to reconcile with the man before her. His eyes were kind, not the cold, hardened gaze she had been told to expect. There was a weariness in his expression, but it didn't seem threatening. "I wasn't sure if you would come," he continued, his smile widening. "I wasn't sure anyone would dare step outside the Queen's control." Elena's eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of danger, but there was nothing, no weapon, no trap. Just the man standing in the shadows, looking almost lonely. "I'm here," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly. She cleared her throat, trying to sound more confident. "I came because I need to know more about you, about your people." The human raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Why?" Elena hesitated. She didn't have an answer ready, not a proper one, but the words spilled out before she could stop them. "Because I don't understand," she said, her voice more forceful now. "I don't understand why my mother hates you so much, why she keeps us hidden away from everything, from everyone. I don't understand why we have to live like this, under constant control." The human seemed to consider her words carefully, his eyes narrowing as if he were trying to understand her too. "Your mother, she's afraid," he said softly, the words almost a whisper. "Afraid of losing control of what might happen if she lets go. But that doesn't mean you have to live in fear forever. You're not like her." Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was the first time anyone had spoken to her like that. No one had ever suggested that she was anything more than a princess, a future ruler, a daughter of the queen. No one had ever spoken as if she had a choice. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm nothing more than a tool for my mother's plans, a piece in her game." The human stepped forward, his eyes intense. "You're more than that. You can be whoever you want to be, but only if you choose it." Elena stared at him, uncertainty swirling in her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe there was a way out, a way to escape the life her mother had chosen for her. But it felt like a dangerous fantasy. She had been raised to obey, to serve, to think of nothing but the Empire's survival. How could she turn away from that? "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice trembling. The human smiled again, but this time it was sad, almost regretful. Because I see something in you, he said. I see someone who's been trapped just like me. We're not so different, you and I. Elena felt a pang in her chest. She had been taught to view humans as beneath her, as inferior beings. Yet this man, this stranger who she had just met, was offering her something her mother had never given her, a choice. Suddenly, there was a soft sound at the door, and Elena turned quickly. Her sister, Lyra, stood in the doorway, her expression one of surprise and confusion. She had always been the more cautious one, the one who stayed behind when Elena ventured out. But now Lyra had come to find her, to bring her back to the safety of the palace. "What are you doing here?" Lyra asked, her voice sharp with concern. Elena took a deep breath and stepped toward her sister, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice filled with determination. "I can't, not after everything I've learned." Lyra's eyes widened in disbelief. "Elena, you can't be serious. We can't just walk away. We're the daughters of the queen. We have a responsibility." But Elena shook her head, her mind made up. "No, Lyra, you don't understand. I can't live in a cage anymore. I need to see the world to know what's out there. I need to know who I really am." Lyra took a step forward, her face a mixture of fear and confusion. "And what about Mother? What about the Empire? What about all the people who depend on us?" Elena's voice softened, but her resolve remained firm. "I don't know what's best for the Empire anymore. I only know what's best for me." Lyra stood frozen for a moment, her eyes filled with uncertainty. But then, slowly, she nodded. "I'll go with you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But we can't do this alone. We need help. We need to be smart about this." Elena smiled, grateful for her sister's support. "I know, that's why we're here." As the two sisters turned to face the human, they realized that everything had changed. They were no longer just daughters of the queen, bound by duty and fear. They were something more now, two women with a future of their own to choose, free from the Empire's suffocating grasp. The days following Elena's decision to stay with the human passed in a blur. The quiet, oppressive calm of the palace felt more suffocating than ever. Lyra's reluctance to leave lingered in Elena's thoughts, but she knew she couldn't go back. Not after everything she had learned, not after meeting him. There was something about the human that had sparked a fire inside her, something she had never felt in all the years of training and obedience. She spent her nights alone, thinking, planning. The palace walls seemed to close in around her as she imagined the life she could have outside these walls. A life where she wasn't just the queen's daughter, but her own person. A life where she could make her own choices. It was early one morning when Lyra finally approached her, her expression serious. She had been silent for days, her mind clearly battling the same conflict Elena had struggled with. The younger sister had always been more cautious, more afraid of change. But now Elena could see the storm in her eyes. "I've thought about what you said," Lyra began, her voice hesitant but firm. "And I'm scared of what might happen to us if we leave, to the Empire, to our mother." "But," she hesitated, then met Elena's eyes. "But I can't deny that I feel the same way. I've been trapped too." Elena's heart skipped a beat. She had expected resistance, but not this. Lyra had always been the obedient one, the dutiful daughter. To hear her speak like this was both surprising and comforting. It meant that they were in this together. "I don't want to live under our mother's control anymore either," Lyra continued. "But what do we do now? We can't just walk away and expect things to be okay. We need a plan." Elena nodded, her mind already racing. She had spent so many years thinking about escape, but now that it was real, now that her sister was with her, the weight of it felt heavier. They weren't just running away. They were leaving behind everything they had ever known. Their mother, their people, their future. "There's someone who can help," Elena said, her voice steady. "The human, he knows the way out. He's seen the world beyond this palace. He can show us what's possible." Lyra bit her lip, uncertainty still clouding her face. "But can we really trust him? He's a human. We've been taught to see them as nothing more than barbarians." Elena's gaze softened. "I thought the same, but he's different. He's not like what we've been told. He's not just some soldier or traitor. He's someone who understands what it's like to be trapped. He's been there just like us. He has something we don't, freedom." Lyra was quiet for a long time, her eyes searching Elena's face for something, for some sign that this was the right choice. Finally, she spoke, her voice a whisper. "What if we're wrong? What if leaving is a mistake?" Elena reached out, taking her sister's hand. "I don't know what's waiting for us out there, but I do know that staying here isn't the answer. We have to take a chance, Lyra, for ourselves." Lyra squeezed her hand tightly, her voice trembling but determined. "Then I'm with you. We'll do this together." The next few days were spent in a whirlwind of secrecy. Elena and Lyra moved quietly through the palace, careful not to attract attention. They spoke in hushed tones, planning their escape. The fear of being caught gnawed at Elena, but it was nothing compared to the fear of staying. Every day spent in the palace felt like another day lost to the life they had been forced into. In the dead of night, when the palace was asleep and the guards were distracted, the two sisters met the human again. His name was Ryan, and he had been waiting for them just as he had promised. He didn't question them or ask for explanations. He simply led them out into the night, guiding them through the darkened halls of the palace to a hidden exit they had never known about. Elena's heart raced as they passed through the winding corridors, the walls of the palace stretching around them like a labyrinth. Ryan was their only hope. He had lived a life on the run, constantly moving, constantly hiding. He had seen the world beyond the Empire's control, and he understood what it meant to be free. He had made the difficult choice to leave everything behind, and now he was offering that same choice to them. Elena didn't know what would happen next, but as they stepped into the night, leaving the palace behind them, she felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in her life, she was making her own decision. The city outside the palace walls was quieter than Elena had imagined. The streets were empty, the buildings dark and silent. It was a stark contrast to the bustling energy of the palace, where life was always busy and filled with the noise of command. Here, in the quiet streets, she could almost believe she was someone else, someone free. Ryan led them through the shadows, moving quickly but carefully. Elena stayed close to him, her heart beating faster with each step. Lyra walked beside her, still uncertain but resolute. They didn't speak much, the weight of their decision hanging over them. Eventually, they reached a small ship hidden in an alley. It wasn't much, but to Elena it seemed like a lifeline. This was the beginning of everything. "This is it," Ryan said, turning to face them. "It's not much, but it'll get us out of here. Once we're on board, there's no turning back. We'll be on our own." Elena took a deep breath, looking at her sister. Lyra nodded, her expression determined. "We've already made our choice. There's no turning back for us." The three of them climbed aboard the small ship, and as the engines hummed to life, Elena looked out through the small window. The palace was already far behind, and as the ship lifted off, she felt a sense of freedom she had never known before. But even as the stars stretched out before her, a sense of unease lingered in her chest. She had made the choice to leave, to take control of her future. But what would happen when they reached the unknown? What would happen when they had to face the consequences of their actions? She didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. This was the first step in a journey that would change everything. The stars shone brightly ahead of them, and for the first time, Elena felt like she was truly free. The journey into the unknown was more difficult than Elena had imagined. The small ship they traveled in was nothing more than a rusted, makeshift vessel, but it was all they had. Ryan had assured them it would get them far, but the ship creaked and groaned with every movement, as though protesting its mission. Elena couldn't help but feel a strange unease settle in her chest. They were leaving behind everything, her mother, her people, the only life they had ever known, and heading into a world where nothing was certain. The stars outside the ship's small window were bright and endless, but they felt distant, cold. Elena's gaze lingered on them for a moment, wondering what the future held. Would they be able to live freely, away from the Empire's reach? Or would they be forced to live in constant hiding, always running from the life they had left behind? Lyra sat beside her, her expression as quiet and uncertain as ever. Though she had agreed to leave with Elena, the reality of their situation seemed to be hitting her hard. Elena could see the fear in her sister's eyes, the silent questions she had yet to voice. "How far do you think we'll get?" Lyra asked quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. Elena turned to face her, offering a small, reassuring smile. "As far as we need to go, we're free now. That's all that matters." Lyra didn't seem convinced, but she nodded, her eyes drifting back to the stars outside. She was still holding on to some part of the life they had left behind. Elena could understand that. It was hard to let go of everything they had known, even if that life had been stifling. Ryan glanced over at them from the cockpit, his eyes sharp, always alert. He had been their guide, their protector, but even he seemed restless. He hadn't said much since they left the planet, and Elena could tell he was lost in thought, perhaps wondering if they would make it to their destination, or if they would be caught before they even had the chance to start anew. Don't worry, he said suddenly, catching Elena's gaze. We'll be fine, we've got the time, no one's looking for us yet. The uncertainty in his voice was subtle but present. Elena didn't miss it. They were out of the palace now, but that didn't mean they were safe. The Empire had eyes everywhere. They would be looking for them soon enough. How long until we reach the outer rim? Elena asked, trying to focus on something other than the nagging fear in her chest. A few more days, Ryan replied. If we keep on this course, we should be in the clear. No one will be able to track us beyond that. The Empire doesn't have the resources to chase down a ship this small. But Elena knew better. The Empire had resources. They had power. And as much as Ryan tried to reassure them, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted. She glanced at Lyra again, who still looked distant. Her sister's quiet demeanor only added to the weight of Elena's thoughts. Over the next few days, their situation didn't improve. The small ship was cramped, and the food they had packed was already running low. Ryan tried to keep their spirits up, telling them stories of his travels, of the worlds he had seen, but it wasn't enough to distract them from the reality of their escape. Elena could tell that Lyra was struggling. She missed the comfort of the palace, the familiarity of their old life. She missed their mother, even if Elena couldn't understand why. Elena had her own doubts, but she had made her choice. She couldn't go back to a life of fear and control. She couldn't let her mother's hold on them define who they were. She had to believe that the future they were heading toward would be better than the past they had left behind. One evening, as they sat in the small dining area, Lyra spoke again. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. Do you think Mother will come after us? Elena looked at her sister, her heart aching. I don't know, but if she does, we'll be ready. Lyra's gaze fell to the floor, her fingers twisting together in her lap. I still can't believe we're doing this. I thought I would never leave her. I thought I would always be here doing what she wanted. You don't have to anymore, Elena said gently. We're not her daughters anymore, Lyra. We're not anyone's prisoners. But what about the Empire? What about all the people who rely on us? Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What about the people we're leaving behind? Elena felt a pang of guilt, but she pushed it aside. The people who rely on us, they deserve to be free too. And maybe, just maybe, if we make it, we can change things. We can show them that it doesn't have to be this way. Lyra was silent for a long time, and Elena could see the struggle in her eyes. Her sister was torn between loyalty to their mother, to the Empire, and the pull of the freedom they had just stepped into. Elena understood that. She had felt the same way before, but now she was certain. They had to keep moving forward. The next morning, as the ship continued its journey through the vast expanse of space, a strange signal interrupted the quiet. It was faint at first, just a flicker in the background, but it quickly grew louder. Ryan was the first to notice it. Someone's trying to reach us, he said, his voice tense. He quickly worked the controls, trying to make sense of the signal. It's a tracking signal. Someone found us. Elena's heart dropped. The fear she had been pushing aside suddenly returned, more real than ever. She looked at Ryan, then at Lyra, who had also stiffened at the sound of the alert. We need to move, Ryan said, his voice sharp. Get to the back, stay out of sight. Elena didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed Lyra's hand, and they quickly made their way to the small, hidden compartment at the back of the ship. Ryan was already at the controls, his face set in concentration as he tried to outrun the signal. Elena's mind raced. The Empire had found them. It was only a matter of time before they sent a fleet to capture them. They couldn't outrun them forever. We need a plan, Elena said, her voice low. We can't let them catch us. We have to be smarter than this. But Ryan didn't answer. His focus was entirely on the ship's systems, his hands moving rapidly across the controls. Elena knew he was doing his best, but it wasn't enough. The tracker was too strong. Suddenly, the ship shook violently. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the walls. Elena's stomach dropped. They were under attack. Hold on, Ryan shouted as he fought to stabilize the ship. The shaking stopped, but the fear didn't. They had just crossed into enemy territory. The Empire was closing in, and their escape was slipping away. Elena looked at Lyra, who was holding onto the seat with white knuckles. For the first time since they had left the palace, she saw the same fear in her sister's eyes. The reality of their situation had finally set in. They were running, but they weren't safe. Not yet. And the journey ahead was more dangerous than either of them had imagined. The ship shook again, harder this time, and the hum of the engines faltered for a moment before Ryan managed to stabilize them. Elena gripped the edge of her seat, her heart racing. The silence that followed the shaking was heavy, filled with the reality that their freedom was now more fragile than ever. She glanced at Lyra, whose face was pale and tense. Her sister's hands clenched into fists in her lap, and her eyes darted nervously between Elena and Ryan. "Are we going to be okay?" Lyra finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena wanted to reassure her, to say everything would be fine, but she couldn't. The truth was, she didn't know. They were on the run, and the Empire was powerful. No matter how far they traveled, no matter how many ships they dodged, they were being hunted. The signal had been sent out, and now, every moment that passed felt like it could be their last. Ryan glanced back at them, his face set in determination. "We'll be fine as long as we keep moving, but we need to make a choice. Do we keep going or do we fight?" Elena's mind raced. Fight. Could they really fight the might of the Empire? They were 3 people on a small, barely functional ship, but turning back was not an option. They couldn't go back to the palace, to the life they had just left behind. There was no going back now. "We keep moving," Elena said, her voice firm despite the doubt that lingered in her chest. "We've come this far, we can't give up now." Ryan nodded, but the worry in his eyes didn't disappear. He turned back to the controls, his fingers flying over the ship's dashboard as he worked to keep them on course. Elena leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. They were close now, closer to the unknown world Ryan had promised them, closer to the freedom they had longed for. But the fear of being caught was like a shadow, always lurking just behind them. The next few days passed in a blur of tense silence, punctuated by moments of frantic activity when Ryan had to adjust the ship's course or fix something that had broken down. The ship was old, and they didn't have the luxury of time or resources to make repairs properly. They were relying on Ryan's experience, on his ability to keep the ship running even when it seemed like everything would fall apart. But despite their best efforts, they couldn't outrun the Empire forever. One morning, as Elena stared out the window at the endless stretch of stars, a voice came through the ship's communication system. It was clear, cold, and unmistakably authoritative. "Unidentified vessel, you are in violation of Imperial space. You are to surrender immediately. If you resist, we will be forced to take further action." Elena's heart skipped a beat. The Empire had found them. It wasn't just a possibility anymore, it was happening. She turned to Ryan, who had gone pale at the sound of the voice. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the controls. "Can we outrun them?" Elena asked, her voice tight with panic. Ryan shook his head, his face grim. "No, they've got us cornered. We have no choice now but to fight or to hide." The ship's alert system began to blare, warning them that they were being targeted. The sound was deafening, a constant reminder of the danger they were in. Elena's mind raced. There had to be another way. They couldn't afford to be captured. They couldn't go back to that life, back to the control, the fear. But there was no time to think. The Empire's ships were closing in fast, and they were armed with far more power than anything Ryan's ship could handle. "We need to hide," Elena said urgently. "Find somewhere to hide. Anything." Ryan nodded, his hands moving quickly over the controls as he tried to maneuver the ship into a nearby asteroid field. The rocks and debris offered a temporary cover, but it wouldn't be long before the Empire's ships would find them again. The ship jolted as it entered the asteroid field, rocks bouncing off the hull, some scraping against the sides. The vibrations made Elena's stomach churn, but she didn't have time to feel sick. She was too focused on the task at hand. "We need to stay hidden," she said, her voice strained. "We can't let them see us. We can't let them find us." Ryan gritted his teeth as he navigated through the field, trying to avoid the larger rocks while using the smaller ones for cover. The asteroid field was dense, and the Empire's ships would have to slow down to search for them, but that also meant they would be vulnerable. The longer they stayed here, the more chances they had of being found. "We can't keep hiding forever," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty. "Eventually they'll find us." Elena's heart sank. Lyra was right, they couldn't stay here forever, but she didn't know what else to do. The fear of being caught, of being brought back to the palace, was overwhelming. The future they had dreamed of, the life they had fought for, seemed so fragile now, so uncertain. "I know," Elena said quietly, "but we don't have any other choice right now." Hours passed as the ship weaved through the asteroid field and the Empire's ships drew closer. The tension inside the small vessel was unbearable. Elena could barely breathe, her thoughts spinning. They couldn't keep running. Eventually, they would have to face the Empire. "We have to make a stand," Elena said suddenly, surprising both herself and Lyra. "We can't keep hiding, we have to fight back." Ryan looked back at her, his eyes wide with surprise. "Are you sure we don't have the firepower to fight them?" Elena's eyes locked with his, her voice steady. "We don't have a choice. We fight or we lose everything. We fight or we go back to being prisoners." Lyra hesitated, but then she nodded. "I'm with you, Elena." The decision was made. They couldn't run anymore. They would fight. They had nothing left to lose. Ryan quickly set the ship to go into defensive mode, activating every last weapon and shield they had. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Elena and Lyra braced themselves for what was coming, the pounding of their hearts the only sound in the ship. The Empire's ships were now in sight, their massive forms looming on the horizon. The odds were against them, but Elena didn't care. She had made her choice. She wasn't going to be anyone's prisoner anymore, not ever again. The first shots fired and the battle began. The ship jolted as the enemy's lasers hit the shields. Ryan fought to keep them steady, firing back as best he could. The ship's small size made it harder to target, but it also made them more vulnerable. Every movement had to be calculated, every action decisive. Elena and Lyra held on tight, their bodies pressed against the seats as the ship swerved to avoid incoming fire. Elena's mind was sharp, every nerve on edge. She wasn't going to let them take her back. She wasn't going to let them take her freedom. They fired back again, and for a moment the ship rocked as one of the Empire's vessels took a hit. It wasn't enough to destroy it, but it gave them a chance. They couldn't keep this up for long, but it was enough to give them a glimmer of hope. "We can do this," Elena said through gritted teeth, her voice filled with determination. "We have to." And just when it seemed like the battle was lost, when the ship was on the verge of collapse, something unexpected happened. The Empire's ships began to pull back, their fire weakening. "They're retreating," Ryan said, his voice filled with disbelief. Elena couldn't believe it. They had won, they had actually won. The battle was over, the Empire had retreated for now. But Elena knew that this was just the beginning. Their journey was far from over. They had fought for their freedom and they had won. But the road ahead would be long and the challenges they faced would be many. But as the ship sailed through the stars, Elena allowed herself a small smile. They had made it. They were free. For the first time in her life, Elena felt like she was finally in control of her own destiny. And nothing, not even the Empire, could take that away from her.